we are going to dive into a great big bag of what ifs. And the first one would shake some of you to your very core. Because I happen to know some of you hate Brian Kelly. And then I happen to know a few more of you don't like him. So think about this. Tanner hit us up. He said, what if LSU wins the SEC? He didn't say the West. He didn't say what if they go to Atlanta and get skull drug again. He said, what if they win the SEC? Well, that would be the definitive arrival of LSU back to Tier 1 of college football. They certainly, I would imagine, they make the playoff if they win the SEC. Like Hoomst doesn't these days if they win the SEC. Brian Kelly's perceptional transformation, I think, would also kind of be complete at that point. The perception, let me take a second here. So the perception of Brian Kelly when he was at Notre Dame was one thing. And then the mistake people made is when he went to LSU, they thought the version of Brian Kelly they had seen at Notre Dame was his legit under-the-surface personality. No. What you're getting at LSU is the real Brian Kelly. He had just tightened the sweater vest a little too tight up there at Notre Dame. I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do things. Like, I happen to love Notre Dame. I happen to think I'd be a half-decent head coach at Notre Dame. I respect the traditions up there. I'm just saying some guys are a little looser, and they pretend to be a little more, for lack of a better term, uptight. And Brian Kelly goes to LSU, and all of a sudden he's loose. He's enjoying things. He's enjoying life, and people think it's fake. It's not fake. You're getting the real Brian Kelly now. Well, anyway, if they were to win the SEC this year, the folks who dislike him for non-football related reasons would at that point have to just shut up. What can you do at that point? The guy just won the SEC, and he won it at the expense of Nick Saban in this scenario. And this is its own set of issues for Alabama, by the way. It looks like he won it at the expense of Kirby Smart in Georgia, maybe? Like, can you imagine that run? You go through FSU and at Ole Miss and Alabama and Florida and Texas A&M. Then maybe you go to Atlanta and you face Georgia and you win all that. Those soft SEC 8-game conference schedules down there. It also means those portal defensive backs came through with flying colors. That's what happens. That's the what-if scenario if LSU wins the SEC. Next up, why stop at conferences? Let's just go right to the college football playoff. Marcus hit us up and said, what if Oklahoma makes the playoff? Well, they would virtually have to win the Big 12. I don't think an at-large is making it from the Big 12 in a 4-team field. Now, you may hit pause here and you may say, well, that's a pretty ignorant thing to say. An at-large just made it last year. I know, friends, but you need to understand something. You are not always what your record says you are. And in this particular case, Oklahoma plays one Power 5 team with a preseason win total over 8 this year, and that's Tejas. So if they lose to Texas, then first off, they're kind of behind the 8 ball there for a lot of different reasons. But also, if they lose to Texas, where's the best win they have? And so I think they got to win the Big 12. I think they have to do that. Maybe they lose to Texas in round 1 and atone for it in the conference title game. I guess that could happen. But Dylan Gabriel has shined in this scenario if they're in the college football playoff. Also, defensively, I was about to say defense has improved. Defensively, they've massively improved. I know there's a lot of focus on the offense out there. Defense was atrocious last year. Like, atrocious. So it has to have massively improved. And speaking of perceptional transformation, what you saying about Brent Venables? If OU's in the playoff. And then think about this. So this is the one that Marcus didn't want to do. He didn't want to go this far with his what if. But I'll do it for you, Marcus, because I'm operating consequence-free here. It's just what if. It's like, what if I robbed a bank? You can't call the cops because I didn't do it yet. What if Oklahoma wins a playoff game and Brent Venables does something Lincoln Riley never did in Norman, Oklahoma? And then you want to know the real what if in all caps. What if they beat USC? That's a bridge too far. Let's move on. The anti-producer Jesse Special is next up. Because one of you accused us of some pro-Penn State handling on the show. And the allegation was that Jesse has sort of infiltrated the production process. And he's wiped any negativity towards Penn State. And he's basically operating as a shadow promotional puppet for Penn State University within our midst. which is a tall allegation against someone that you still can't even prove exists. So if Penn State, well, this is the what if from David. What if Penn State loses to Michigan and Ohio State? If this happens, this is an uncomfortable but necessary stat to read you. If they lose, if Penn State loses to Michigan and Ohio State this year, James Franklin would be 4-14 against those teams. Not great. It could be the most hollow 10-2 season ever. You would have some really ridiculous conversation happening about whether James Franklin's the right guy for the job. Again, even if they go 10-2, they're doing it with Ryan Day right now. You know good and well they do it with James Franklin. And then I would just beat it down like a piñata, like we always have to do on this show. I need to know how they lost. That's what I need to know. I need more from this what if. I need to know if it's 49-14 or I need to know if it's a couple of 3-point games either way. Now, you may say, doesn't matter, Josh. You are what your record says you are. A win is a win. A loss is a loss. In the standings, that's true. But if we're talking about the perception of a coach, if we're talking about how close a program is, that stuff matters a whole lot. Michigan State's a good example. Michigan State last year lost a lot of games, but they got blown out in them. So I don't look at them the same way I would look at a team that lost 5 games by a combined 17 points. You know, where I think one bounce of ball here or there could just change the trajectory of a season. Well, if Penn State were to lose by 3 TDs apiece to Michigan and Ohio State, man, that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, even if you did win the other 10. But if they're close back and forth, I know it's hollow. I know it's like eating a sandwich where there's nothing in between. It's just bread. But 2024 is a season they've kind of been building towards up there anyway. It just so happens that they should be really good this year as well. What are we going to do? Are we going to look at 10-2, losing 2 games to 2 potentially top 4 teams and say, screw it. Let's just punt on 2024. No. But at the same time, I get it. Like if you've watched the show a long enough time, you know I always tell you, if you give big, you should expect big. Simple return on investment principles. Penn State folks invest big. It's not too much to ask to be right there in the conversation with those two. Because a Penn State fan up in Harrisburg looks at it, or up in Bethlehem looks at it, or York, or Wilkes-Barre. I'm just throwing out Pennsylvania geography at this point. But they look at it and they say, what does a Michigan fan give that we don't? What do those folks in Columbus give that we don't? They think this way at Texas A&M, and they're right. What are they giving elsewhere that we're not? Well, the answer is nothing. And so if the answer is nothing, then the follow-up phrase should be, all right, well, shouldn't we expect what they get? Shouldn't we expect some of that? Yeah, you should. That's why I'm not always the first to rush to the drum and beat the drum that, you guys are myopic. Your expectations are way out of whack. Hey, maybe in some cases they are. I don't think it's an out of whack expectation for a Penn State fan to say, I think every few years one of these division championships should be ours. I think we should split with Ohio State and Michigan on average every year. I don't think that's out of whack. And I think they have a reasonable chance to do it this year. How about this last one? Go out to the West Coast for a second. James said, what if Oregon State versus Oregon decides a Pac-12 title berth? Firstly, James, I want to tell you, I think I was well into my 20s before I understood that there was a version of the word berth that had an E in it. I'll just be upfront with you about that. So James nailed it. And James is saying Oregon State versus Oregon. It's Black Friday. Friday, right after Thanksgiving, last week of the year, rivalry week. James is saying this game is going to decide half of the Pac-12 championship matchup. One last civil war before Oregon jets off to the Big Ten and Oregon State falls off into the Pacific, figuratively. I would be entertained by it, but I'm already entertained by it because, I do this crazy thing where I just love college football, so I'd love it anyway. But if you put these implications on it, wow. Now, I don't know that I could ever envision a program and a team in a more us against the world mindset at that point than Oregon State. Think about this. You got Oregon State versus Oregon. Winner goes to Vegas for the Pac-12 championship game. And you're looking across the state now, and you're looking down at Eugene, and you know whether they win or lose this thing. They got all the Nike money in the world. They got new facilities popping up. They got a new uniform every 5 minutes. They're off to the Big Ten. They're fine. They're going to be fine. Let it work. It works. It works for Oregon. It don't work for us in Corvallis. This is it for us for a little while. And so you're talking about if you had a third middle finger, you'd throw up all three of them in the case that you won this game because you're the one they didn't want. You're the one people have looked at and said, oh, well, let's just watch them fade in the dust. But you end up winning it as the curtain drops on the Pac-12 as we know it. You end up winning that thing. And then maybe you go and you win the whole thing. Maybe you win the Pac-12 championship. Maybe, again, since this is what if, we can just do this. Maybe I look at that odds board Colin just threw up to win the Pac-12 championship, and I look at Oregon State there at plus 1,200 odds. What if the old Beavs, they just thwap their way to a Pac-12 championship, and they go to the playoff? The Pac-12 hadn't been there since Washington in 16 or 17. What if they're the ones who do it? And then they look around afterwards and say, oh, we don't have a conference anymore. Okay, cool, great, all right. That's why what if is fun. You notice none of that was predicted. It's just a what if.